They won the war and still lost everything. Because sometimes the greatest killer of innovation is victory itself. This is the story of how Microsoft's Internet Explorer, the king of the early internet, didn't get destroyed by competitors. It destroyed itself. And by the end of this story, you'll see exactly how power, comfort, and arrogance can quietly kill even the most unstoppable empire, and how you can avoid the same mistake in your own journey. Because every rise is a pattern, every fall has a warning, and sometimes the very thing that makes you powerful is what eventually destroys you. In the late 1990s, the internet wasn't what it is today. There were no social networks, no streaming platforms, no viral videos, just static web pages, flashing banners, and that screeching dial-up tone that signaled you were connecting to something bigger than yourself. It was chaotic, clunky, and magical all at once, a frontier still being mapped. Computers weren't sleek aluminum devices yet. They were beige boxes that hummed on desks. The monitors were heavy, the modems noisy, and every website felt like a window into a new world. Every click carried a sense of discovery. You weren't just browsing, you were exploring. And in this unexplored world, one company built the compass everyone used, Netscape Navigator. If you were online back then, Netscape wasn't just a browser, it was the internet. It loaded pages faster, it looked cleaner, and it gave users a sense of control and freedom that felt revolutionary at the time. You didn't need to be a tech genius to use it. You just needed curiosity. Netscape made the web feel human. It was a window through which millions of people first experienced email, search engines, and the strange magic of chat rooms. Its success wasn't just about software, it was about spirit. The founders of Netscape, led by a young visionary named Mark Andreessen, believed the web belonged to everyone. That idea that anyone could build and share made Netscape more than just a company. It became a movement. But somewhere else, in a quiet corner of Redmond, Washington, another empire was watching closely. Microsoft had already conquered the desktop world. Every office ran on Windows. Every home computer came preloaded with Microsoft software. They had already built the operating system that the world ran on. And now, they were watching as a new platform, this thing called the internet, began to take shape. And for the first time in years, Microsoft wasn't in control. Bill Gates saw it coming. The way people were spending more time online than on the computer itself. The way websites were slowly becoming more powerful than software. The way Netscape was turning the web into something bigger than Windows. He saw it and it terrified him. Because if the web became a new platform, if people could do everything online instead of on their PCs, then Windows would no longer be the center of the universe. Microsoft's dominance would fade. Their entire empire could crumble overnight. So Gates made a decision, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. He wrote a memo in 1995 titled The Internet Tidal Wave. In it, he warned his team that the internet was not just another trend, it was a future. And if Microsoft didn't take control of it immediately, someone else would. From that moment, Microsoft's mission changed. They weren't just building software anymore. They were preparing for war. And the target of that war was Netscape. See, Netscape wasn't giant. It was a fast-moving startup filled with idealists and innovators, the kind of people who believed in changing the world more than dominating it. Microsoft, on the other hand, was an army. They had resources, distribution, and a reputation for doing whatever it took to win. They didn't need to out-innovate Netscape. They just needed to outlast them. And so, they unleashed their secret weapon, Internet Explorer. At first, no one cared. It was slow, basic, buggy. Netscape was still years ahead in features and design. But Microsoft had something Netscape didn't: total control over the operating system. They began bundling Internet Explorer for free with every copy of Windows. Every new PC came with it pre-installed. It wasn't about quality. It was about convenience. If every user already had Internet Explorer sitting there on their screen, why would they bother downloading anything else? And just like that, Microsoft flipped the rules of the game. Netscape could innovate all they wanted, but innovation means nothing when your competitor owns the door everyone walks through. By the end of the decade, Internet Explorer's market share was skyrocketing. Netscape, once the proud pioneer of the web, was being suffocated by Microsoft's size and strategy. And yet, at that point, something subtle began to shift inside Microsoft. Because winning came so easily, they began to mistake power for progress. The goal was no longer to make the best browser. The goal was to make sure no one else could. And that shift, that tiny moment when dominance replaced hunger, would go on to define everything that happened next. But in those early days, it didn't seem like a problem. Microsoft had won before. They'd crushed WordPerfect, Lotus, and dozens of software rivals the same way. To them, Netscape was just another name on the list. What they didn't realize was at this time, the world was changing faster than their playbook could keep up. Because the internet wasn't just another software category. It was a living, evolving ecosystem. One that couldn't be controlled by the same old tricks forever. And while Microsoft celebrated its victory, a quiet decay had already begun. The story of how Internet Explorer killed itself doesn't start with bad code or slow updates. It starts right here, in this moment of pride, in this illusion of safety, when a company believed it had won so completely it forgot how to fight. But before that downfall came the dominance, and the illusion that it would last forever. Because at the dawn of the web, Microsoft had the entire world at its feet. They just didn't realize how fragile power really is until it was already slipping through their fingers. See, Microsoft wasn't built on curiosity. It was built on control. And that control was its greatest strength and its greatest flaw. For years, Microsoft had thrived on one simple principle: dominate the platform, and everything else will fall into place. If you control the operating system, you control the future. But then something new started happening, something even Bill Gates couldn't ignore. People were spending more and more time online. They were reading, shopping, chatting, and working through a browser window, not through Windows itself. The web was becoming the new operating system. And for the first time in a decade, Microsoft was no longer in control of the gateway. That terrified Gates. Because if the web became the new center of gravity, then Windows, the foundation of Microsoft's empire, would become just another tool. And for a company built on dominance, just another tool was a death sentence. So he made a decision that would shape the next 2 decades of tech history. If we don't own the browser, Gates warned, we'll lose the platform. Those weren't just words. That was war. From that day forward, Microsoft's goal wasn't innovation. It wasn't creativity. It was elimination. They didn't just want to win the browser war. They wanted to rewrite the rules of it in their favor. The plan was simple but ruthless. Every new computer running Windows, which was almost every computer in the world, would automatically come with Microsoft's browser built in. No downloads, no installations, no choices, and that browser was Internet Explorer. It didn't matter if people wanted it or not. It was there. It was waiting for you the first time you booted up your PC. It greeted you with that familiar blue E logo, the symbol of the internet itself. The strategy was brilliant and brutal because most users didn't care about browsers. They just wanted the internet to work. And when you're already given something that works well enough, you rarely go searching for something better. And that's how Microsoft slowly strangled Netscape. Not by making a better product, but by controlling the path to access. If Windows was a door, Internet Explorer became the lock. Overnight, Netscape's growth stalled. Downloads dropped. Market share crumbled. And within just a few years, the once dominant browser that had built the early internet was reduced to a whisper of its former self. By 2002, Microsoft had done the unthinkable. 95% of the global browser market belonged to Internet Explorer. It wasn't just dominance, it was total conquest. Every household, every office, every school computer, all of them open to the same browser, powered by the same company, connected to the same ecosystem. The web had a single gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper was Microsoft. For Bill Gates and his team, it was a victory unlike any other. The strategy had worked flawlessly. The competition was crushed, innovation had been subdued, and Microsoft had reclaimed control over the most important platform on Earth, the internet itself. But here's the paradox. The moment Microsoft won, it began to lose. Because when you've crushed every rival, what's left to chase? When your product is guaranteed a spot on every screen, what's left to improve? That's when the slow poison of complacency began to seep in. The engineers stopped pushing boundaries. The updates got slower. The innovation that once drove Microsoft forward started to fade. They had achieved dominance, but at the cost of their drive. And in that quiet comfort, something dangerous began to grow. Netscape was gone. The war was over. The internet was conquered. But no one inside Microsoft realized that their greatest victory had already become a first crack in their armor. Because when the world has no choice but to use your product, you stop giving them a reason to want it. And that, though no one saw at the time, was the real beginning of the end. Because the greatest danger to any empire is an outside enemy. It's the silence that follows victory. When you win everything, you stop fighting for better. You stop asking the hard questions. You stop listening to the people who use what you build. And slowly, quietly, the hunger that once made you unstoppable turns into comfort. And comfort is the slowest, deadliest poison of all. That's exactly what happened to Internet Explorer. At first, it was just small things, the kind of flaws people could overlook. Pages took a little longer to load. Websites didn't look quite right. Compatibility issues here and there. But those small cracks soon became fractures. Internet Explorer started to feel heavy, bloated, slow. Opening a simple web page sometimes felt like running a marathon. Developers, the very people who built the web, began to resent it. Every time they tried to design something new, Internet Explorer would break it. They had to write extra code just to make sure their websites didn't fall apart on Microsoft browser. They didn't just dislike it, they dreaded it. And the irony? Microsoft didn't seem to care. Inside those glass towers in Redmond, the team at Microsoft looked at the numbers and thought everything was fine. They still had more than 90% of the market. People were still using Internet Explorer every day. But here's the truth. People weren't choosing Internet Explorer. They were enduring it. They used it because it came with their computers. They used it because they didn't know any better. They used it because, for a while, they didn't have a choice. But the moment people are forced to rely on something they don't love, that product's days are numbered. Because necessity keeps you alive, but loyalty keeps you relevant. And Internet Explorer had no loyalty left. Then from the ashes of everything Microsoft had ignored, came a rebellion. It didn't come from another tech giant or a billion-dollar company. It came from a small group of volunteers, developers, engineers, and idealists who believed the web didn't belong to any corporation. They called themselves Mozilla. And their mission was simple, almost radical for its time. The internet should be free, open, and built for everyone, not controlled by one company. They weren't just building another browser. They were building a philosophy. From that belief came Mozilla Firefox, a browser that didn't just work better, it felt better. It loaded faster. It respected your privacy. It didn't force updates you didn't ask for. And unlike Internet Explorer, it didn't come attached to a monopoly. It came attached to values. Firefox didn't have Microsoft's money or market power. But what it did have was energy, the kind that only comes from people who are fighting for something they believe in. They were small, but they were hungry. And hunger always beats comfort. While Microsoft sat atop its empire, assuming nothing could touch it, Mozilla's community was working nights and weekends, fixing bugs, improving performance, listening to users, all the things Microsoft had stopped doing years ago. For every complaint about Internet Explorer, Firefox offered a solution. For every slow load time, Firefox loaded faster. For every crash, Firefox stayed stable. And little by little, the world began to notice. Tech forums buzzed with excitement. Have you tried Firefox? Developers started designing websites that looked perfect on it, and broken on Internet Explorer. And users, frustrated by years of forced loyalty, finally found an escape. It wasn't a revolution overnight. It was a quiet awakening. The kind of shift that happened slowly, invisibly, until one day, the world looks up and realizes the king is gone. But Microsoft didn't see it that way. Not yet. From their perspective, Firefox was just noise. A few geeks in garages, a few open source idealists playing around. Nothing worth losing sleep over. They had no idea they were staring at the first real crack in their empire, the first tremor before the earthquake, because what Mozilla was doing wasn't just competing. They were reminding the world that the web belonged to people, not corporations. And that simple idea that the internet could be free again would ignite a fire that even Microsoft, with all its wealth and power, could never fully put out. For the first time in years, users were choosing. And they weren't choosing Internet Explorer. They were choosing freedom. And while Microsoft slept, Firefox began chipping away at its dominance, one frustrated user at a time. But that was just the warm-up, because soon a new challenger entered. A name that would redefine how we browse the web forever. Google Chrome. Chrome was everything Internet Explorer wasn't. Fast, clean, lightweight. It didn't just show you the web. It felt like the web. And Google's secret weapon wasn't software. It was vision. They didn't just want to build a browser. They wanted to build a gateway. One that connected every Google product you'd ever use. Search, mail, maps, YouTube, all in one seamless experience. And while Microsoft was still patching bugs and forcing updates, Google was quietly doing what Microsoft once did best, making people depend on them. By the time Microsoft realized what was happening, Chrome had already eaten half the world. Internet Explorer went from 95% market share to less than 5%, from dominant to forgotten, from being the web to being the punchline of the web. And the company that once dictated the future of the internet was now struggling just to stay relevant. In 2015, after years of denial and decline, Microsoft finally pulled the plug. Internet Explorer, once the mighty ruler of the web, was officially retired. It didn't go out with a bang, no grand farewell, no triumphant last update. It simply faded away, replaced quietly by something new, Microsoft Edge. Edge was supposed to be a fresh start, a redemption story. Faster, sleeker, modern, built on a new foundation. It was Microsoft's way of saying, we've changed, we've learned. But here's the problem with reinvention. You can't just change your name. You have to change your reputation. And by the time Edge arrived, the world had already moved on. Because reputation, once broken, doesn't restart with a new logo. It lingers. It follows you. It becomes a ghost of your old mistakes. And Internet Explorer's ghost was everywhere. For years, it had frustrated millions of users. It had slowed their work, crashed their sites, and symbolized everything wrong with corporate software. So when people saw Microsoft Edge, they didn't see new. They saw the past, repackaged. No matter how much faster or more secure Edge was, people didn't care. They had already made up their minds. To them, Internet Explorer wasn't just a bad browser. It had become a cultural joke. The name that once stood for the gateway to the web now stood for something entirely different. Laziness, slowness, irrelevance. Memes mocked it. Users laughed at it. Developers rolled their eyes every time its logo appeared. And that's the real tragedy. Because Internet Explorer didn't die because others were better. It died because Microsoft stopped earning its users. The death wasn't sudden. It wasn't caused by Chrome or Firefox alone. It was caused by a slow erosion of trust. Every time the browser froze, every time a website broke, every time Microsoft ignored complaints, a little bit of faith was lost. And once that faith was gone, no amount of code could bring it back. The truth is, this story isn't just about browsers. It's not even just about technology. It's about human nature. It's about what happens when success turns into entitlement. When good enough replaces better. When a company or a person stops earning the trust they once had. Because the internet doesn't remember who won. It remembers who stayed relevant. And relevance isn't something you own. It's something you earn every single day. Microsoft thought it could rebuild its image by changing the product. But what it really needed to change was its mindset. The mindset that said, we've already won. The mindset that let complacency creep in and innovation slip away. Internet Explorer was never supposed to die. It could have evolved. It could have led. It could have redefined what browsing meant. But instead, It clung to the past, and the past always breaks those who refuse to outgrow it. So when Microsoft announced Edge, the world didn't cheer. It just shrugged, because by then, Chrome was the internet. Firefox had the trust of developers. And Microsoft, once the gatekeeper of the web, had become a ghost wandering the ruins of its own empire. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden beneath this story, the one that applies far beyond tech. Whether you're a business, a creator, or just someone chasing your dream, success is never something you own. It's something you borrow, and you have to keep earning the right to keep it. The moment you stop improving, the moment you stop listening, you start dying. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, while you're still busy celebrating yesterday's victories. Because just like Internet Explorer, the second you believe you've already won, that's the moment you've already started to lose. Internet Explorer didn't get outsmarted. It got out-evolved. And that's where the value of the story lies. Because whether you're building a brand, a YouTube channel, or just your own career, you can't rely on momentum. You have to earn relevance every single day. Innovation isn't a one-time act. It's a lifestyle. And comfort is the silent killer of every great story. So the next time you feel like you've made it, remember Internet Explorer. It had everything: power, reach, dominance, but not humility. And that's why it vanished. Now here's the question. Do you think Microsoft truly learned from its fall? Or is history already repeating itself through Edge and AI? Let's talk about it in the comments. If this story gave you something to think about, hit that like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep real-life tech stories like this one. Because the more you understand these hidden battles, the more you understand how the digital world really works.